జూమ్ మీటింగ్లో ఉన్నాను 1.5 hours మీకు ఇన్విటేషన్ పంపిస్తాను వినండి. తర్వాత చేస్తాను, మీకు ఇన్విటేషన్ పంపిస్తాను, జూమ్ మీటింగ్ రండి అని.
Hi Vikram.
Hi Vivek, welcome.
Hi Vivek.
Welcome Vivek.
Thanks.
We'll wait for the people to join
sure.
in.
There's enough time.
Yeah.
I also need to. This is.
Okay, you want the number? I'll give you the number. 1 second.
Vivek, a large number of questions have already come in.
Okay, that's great.
So I have shared them with Vikram and Chandana. They'll take them up.
Great.
Vikram,
So they'll pop up on the Q&A thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I haven't done this before, so I mean, I've done Zoom calls, but this Q&A stuff I haven't done before. So.
Yeah, that's okay. They'll my team will help you with them.
In fact, worst come worst, you can even send the questions to me on WhatsApp. So
yeah,
I can just have a look and answer. So that's not a problem.
But they try posting them on Q&A, no?
Yeah, we did that yesterday, so it works.
Yeah,
we did that yesterday. There's one already there. So.
I'll post the rest.
Right.
While we are waiting for others.
Sure. So there's enough time. I mean, this
10
minutes already. So
yeah.
I say it's Sunday. I mean, not that it matters, but it's still Sunday morning. So. Okay, this has to be. WhatsApp बंद करना पड़ेगा. So I see you managed to get an former RBI deputy governor for next week.
That's right. Usha Thorat, yes.
But she retired quite a while back.
Some time back.
Probably
yes.
15 years, I guess.
Yeah.
2010.
10. Okay. 10 years then.
10 years. And then she headed that CAFRAL.
I know. For a while, yeah.
She was in the RBI circuit till about 2015.
There used to be another deputy governor called Kishori Udeshi.
Yes.
I don't know, when she totally... she was on, after she retired, she was on one of these RBI, committees which looked into complaints, of bank. Yeah, I mean, and then she disappeared. I mean, so.
I think Udeshi is nearly quietly retired, if one can say that.
Yeah. So I met her once after she retired, and so this was when she was doing this banking thing, and this was probably 2009 or 2010, sometime like that. But then after that, I've never really. I mean, normally these all these deputy governor kinds, what they do is they try to make up some money after they retire.
Finally,
Yeah. So
I know. And also get into some trouble.
yeah. Because what RBI does is, it really spoils you in the sense that you have flats at the best locations in Bombay, and then you have to suddenly move to Mulund.
I know.
I mean, even SBI for that matter. You're living in a 7 BHK on Nepean Sea Road, and then suddenly you retire and move to Thane. So
I don't know whether you know, RBI also has a very, very special chocolate making kitchen.
oh, okay. I had no idea.
And lovely chocolates, world class.
Okay.
Available only for directors, governors, and deputy governors.
Oh, okay. Achha, even there is a class even
Within
buying
that.
chocolates.
So when we were auditors, we used to be.
I have sent a WhatsApp message to both of you. Just have a look at it.
Okay.
Hi Vivek. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, Chandana. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Be a little.
Chocolate can wait. No, I know. I mean, language.
Yeah.
Hi, Chandana. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
I hope this Sunday treats you well.
Sorry.
I hope this Sunday treats you well.
Oh yes. I hope this entire lockdown treats us well. Hi Vivek.
Hi.
So how many registered, Ajay?
About 800. How many?
800.
God.
How many will come? I don't know. I'm trying.
Even if 50% comes, it's 400. Right?
Yeah. But then we are a little early. It's 10:20 just now.
We have the score says 66 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still 8 minutes away.
What also happens with these things is, more people tend to watch it later.
Yeah.
So I recently did one such thing with Akash Banerjee. So we had around, while we were doing it, we had around 10,000, 12,000 views. But a day later, there were close to 1.5 lakh views. So obviously, many more people saw it later.
Would views also count people who just came and go?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I mean, there's no...
No, it keeps a current count.
Okay.
There is we've not yet started, I can tell you this in public. There's a valuation class which the Institute of Chartered Accountants is running online. And we are warned that those of us who want to take attendance, they'll come and do surprise check every 1 hour online to see whether they can see our faces.
You can just put a picture of yours or a report or a video which sort of goes on,
Recurring or whatever.
I'm sure there is technology to do that. So it shouldn't be very difficult.
Take a GIF that will show you moving all the time.
Yeah. Something on those. And anyway, when there are multiple people, I mean, let's say there are 50 people. I mean, how do you know who's doing what? So.
It's just an example of using old rules for new.
So just one question, how long will the talk be? About an hour and then we stop or what? 45 minutes or?
40, 45 minutes.
Okay. Everyone's so worried about their savings now.
I mean, people have suddenly realized the importance of a fixed deposit, and especially in a city like Mumbai where, it was like, arey, fixed deposit kaun karta hai type. So suddenly portfolios are down 30% and
But even that, the worry about banks.
yeah, that's a different worry altogether. But that's got nothing to do with this current situation. That is another. But here's the thing. No government can let a reasonably big bank fail. So as long as you're not in a cooperative bank or something, I mean, you will be fine. So.
We'll start once the number reaches 100.
Okay.
Right. That will also be around 10:30. So we should be on time.
Which
Yeah.
is around 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Says Ajay, the astrologer. 4 minutes, 100.
I say India, anyway, everything starts a little late. So people, factor that. Even digitally, if you tell them 10:30, they'll probably loiter in it around 10:40, 45.
We have held 305 Manthan events in the last 15 years.
Everything started on time.
And we have been late only 5 or 6 times.
5 or 6 times.
So you clearly on 6 Sigma there. So
Yeah.
I think we should stick to that, Ajay.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we'll start at 10:30.
You remember in those times there used to be an airline called Indigo?
Yeah.
They used to go on time. I don't know whether it still survives. I mean, let's check out on May 4th.
They beat up people to go on time. Don't you remember that?
Indigo will survive. I mean, they have enough cash.
Yeah, okay.
How's your neighborhood? We heard that you were caught in a completely isolated place.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
It's still like that?
No. It's better now. It's sort of opened up. No, so we have 115 now.
Yeah, we'll wait for 2 more minutes. It's 10:28.
Sure.
So at 10:30, we'll turn our videos off.
Correct.
And I'll be staring into a void. So.
I'll be happy to be online for you.
That's okay. I mean, your choice.
Chala. Come on, others, would you like to put off your video?
Bye. All the best.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Welcome to Manthan Online, friends. These are tough, challenging, and unprecedented times, and we have never seen a time like this ever before, is to say the least. We don't know how the epidemic will unfold and what impact it will have on the health of all of us. We also don't know how the epidemic will impact the economy and all of us. That it will have a deep impact and affect all our lives for a very long time is not in doubt. Over the last few weeks, it has been our endeavor at Manthan to bring you experts from a variety of fields who can help us understand this hugely complex issue and help us prepare for it. Vivek Kaul is widely known as the Shah Rukh Khan of economics. He has mastered the art of communicating complex and difficult economics to lay people. He is without doubt the most popular writer on economics in the country. He regularly writes for the Mint, BBC, News Laundry, and many more publications. You would have seen him on television as well so often. He is the author of 5 books on economics and finance, and each of them is a masterpiece. The Easy Money trilogy has been a people's favorite. If some of you recall, he was a speaker at Manthan Samvad last year. And We thought for today we could not have found a better person than him to understand the likely fallout of COVID-19 and how to prepare ourselves for it. He has also been generous been generous not just to accept our invitation, but also to answer your questions relating to personal finance, which is probably what is also bothering you a lot. He will speak for the next 45 minutes or so. You will find a QA button at the bottom of your window, which would be used to ask your questions. A moderator will ask the questions on your behalf and get Vivek to answer for them. Your audio and video will remain muted during the entire event. This session will be put up on the Manthan YouTube channel in a couple of days. Feel free to go back to it and watch it again. Along with Zoom, this event is also live webcast on the Manthan YouTube channel. If any of your friends have not been able to join here, you could refer them to the Manthan India channel. We hope you will enjoy and learn from today's session. To all who are participating in Manthan meetings for the first time, please join at manthanindia.com, like Facebook/Manthan India, and subscribe to YouTube/Manthan India. Vivek, welcome back to Manthan. I'm sure you will enjoy being here.
Yeah.
Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay. And good morning to you all. First and foremost, I would sort of like to thank Manthan for having me over. And, the fact that we're doing this digitally tells us that Manthan is in tune with the times that we are in. And, even something as big as COVID-19 hasn't stopped them from continuing with their mission. So normally, this is not how Sunday mornings are, not for all of us. In fact, I was talking to a friend before this, and he was like, he didn't even realize that today is a Sunday. So that's how things have been for a while. Having said that, I just wanted to start with a couple of disclaimers. The first thing that I'd like to say is that if you've sort of been reading my columns regularly over the last few weeks, you would know as to what I broadly think about the negative impact of COVID-19. So much of what I say will obviously be borrowed from my columns, but the difference obviously will be that a column ends in 1,000, 1,100 words at best, and you really don't get a complete picture. So this talk will essentially give you a complete picture of how I see the negative repercussions of COVID-19 spreading in the next few months or over the course of the remaining part of this year. The second disclaimer that I'd like to make is, what has happened, and this is a disclaimer I sort of try and give at the beginning of all my talks. Now, what has happened with the subject of economics in the last, 75 years after the Second World War is that it's become very mathematical. And to that sense, there is a feeling that economics is a science. I mean, but I don't think economics is a science. It's partly maths and a lot of other things. So to sort of give you a reference straight out of Hindi cinema, a few years back, there was this movie called Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, directed by Zoya Akhtar. And in that, there is a line which Nasruddin Shah's character, by far one of the best guest appearances in Hindi cinema, asks Farhan Akhtar's character rather rhetorically that, "Sach kya hota hai?" And then goes on to answer by saying that sabka apna apna ek version hota hai. So which basically means, what is truth? Everybody's got their own version. So what you're about to hear for the next 40-45 minutes is my version of what I think is going to be true. Now, whether I'm right or whether I'll be wrong, I mean, that only time will tell. Because we are in totally uncharted territory here. So I would like to sort of start this talk with John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes was a British economist who probably the most famous economist of the 20th century, who died in 1946 at the age of 62. Both his parents outlived him, and he was famously gay during his younger years, and then married a Russian ballet dancer called Lydia Lopakova. Lady Keynes, as she eventually came to be known, obviously outlived her husband as well, and she was alive as late as 1988. Now, I mean, obviously, these are not the things which make Keynes famous. What makes him famous among his many writings is his magnum opus called The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which was published in 1936. Now, in this book, Keynes essentially tries, or rather tried to understand the reasons behind the Great Depression of 1929 and why was it as bad as it turned out to be. So he came up with a very basic concept, which I would like to start with before I get into any more details. What he said was that income, rather spending at an individual level, I mean, any spending that you and I do in order to live our lives the way we do. So spending at an individual level is basically a function of income, the money you and I make. Whereas spending at a societal level, rather income at a societal level, is a function of spending. Now, to put it in simple English, what Keynes meant was one man's spending is another man's income. So let's say you have a job, right, and your company pays you a salary every month. Now, the money that you make is your major form of income, and that money you essentially spend on goods and services that you need to lead your life well, or even on goods and services you don't need. Because that is how consumerism actually works. But at the end of the day, you spend from the income that you earn. So at an individual level, spending is a function of income. Now, but the question to actually ask here is, where does the company get the money from to pay you? Now, every company obviously is in some business, and it sells some goods, it manufactures some goods, or it offers some services for which people pay. So actually, they spend money. When they spend money, the company earns money, and out of that money, the company pays you something, and that is your income. So at an aggregate level, spending determines income, whereas at an individual level, income determines spending. So this is one of the the most basic points in economics that I guess all of us need to understand. Now, the question here is, why have I sort of started on a Sunday morning with an old British economist and what he had to write way back in 1936, right? So how is this connected to the topic at hand? Now, I mean, I don't know if you guys have realized this, but many businesses, be it malls, cinemas, automobile companies, hotels, airlines, electronic retailers, other retailers, publishing companies, bookstores, real estate companies, online platforms, and even restaurants are going to earn zero sales revenue during April. And if not zero, very close to zero. The same also stands true for many small businesses in your area, right? I mean, people who run tailoring shops, I mean, the few tailoring shops that are around, dry cleaners, wine shop owners to some extent, not all of them, I guess, shops selling ready-made clothes, barbers, pan and cigarette vendors, etc. Now, the point is that because they are shut, there's no way you can buy the goods and services they have to offer. So there is no spending at an aggregate level, and hence there's no income for them. Now, this basically drives us to another fundamental point that Keynes made, and and what economists like to call the fallacy of composition. The problem with economists is they like to give complicated terms to what are essentially simple concepts, to basically make the whole thing sound very, very esoteric than it actually is. So what is fallacy of composition? The fallacy of composition basically states that what's good for an individual may not be good for the society as a whole. So to give you an example, if you decide to start saving money, right? I mean, you are, let's say you've not been saving money and now you decide, okay, I need to start saving money. So it makes perfect sense for you because few months down the line, you would have sort of ended up accumulating a nice little kitty, which you can access when, times are not so good, right? Uh, so saving at an individual level makes immense sense. But if many individuals start saving more, then there is a problem. It's not good news. It's not always good news for the economy, because when people save more, they spend less, and when they spend less, as I said, incomes of others go down. So how is all this linked to the current scenario, which is basically a lockdown that we are in? We are in now. So what has been happening is that given that all of us are at home, we've been spending very little money. We've basically been spending money only on our things that we need to live our everyday lives, or what economists again like to call non-discretionary expenditure. So because we are sort of spending money on only the most essential things, and even if we want to spend money on non-essential things, there's no way we can really go about it. Incomes of many businesses have taken a beating, and honestly, there is very little chance of them being able to recover this income in the days to come. Now, when incomes take a beating, because at an individual level, income determines spending, spendings take a beating as well. And when spending takes a beating at an aggregate level, incomes again take a beating, and then spendings take a beating again. And this is how the cycle plays out. Also, even if, let's say, the lockdown ends on May 4th, I don't think people are suddenly going to stop practicing social distancing, and because of that, many service-oriented businesses will get impacted. Now, I don't know how many of you've got this forward, but there's this forward going around about how dangerous it is to visit a barber shop. Now, I'm really not, sure about the science behind it, but the larger point is that it obviously puts the fear of visiting a barber shop in people's minds. The other great example here is that of cinema halls, or rather that of cinema. Now, Sweden is one country which hasn't really gone in for a lockdown, and their cinemas continue to be operational. And from what I have been able to gather, not many people are actually visiting cinema halls as of now. In fact, a few days back, I was reading an interview of one of the producers of this big release called Suryavanshi, which was scheduled on March 24th and was eventually postponed. And from what I could gather from the interview is that none of the producers of all the big films that were scheduled to be released, including Suryavanshi, and then there was 1983, are in a hurry to release their movies. So they are actually going to sort of wait it out and see as to how soon people go back to cinemas, and only then decide, when to release their movie. So from what I remember reading in this article, and what the gentleman was basically saying that was that big films will only come back around 6 months down the line. So there is there's a problem there. Now, obviously, some of the consequences of incomes of business going down will be employees being laid off. Has already started across large parts of the world, even in India, and particularly in the informal sector, which is basically, the largest employer. Put on leave without pay. Many companies have already done this. Airlines are a very good example in India. Salary cuts has happened all across the media. Postponement of date of joining of new hires. Many banks are doing it. No fresh recruitment all over the place. No increments this year all over the place. So obviously, again, incomes will get impacted, spendings will get impacted, incomes will get impacted again, and so the story will go. Now, what's interesting is that, more than getting fired, what impacts the economy is the fear of getting fired, or what I would like to call, the psychology of a slowdown or a psychology of a recession, depending on how badly we end up because of COVID-19. Now, the first round of firing creates, or rather will create, a fear of losing one's job. And that will have a larger impact on the economy than the firings per se. Now, I would like to take an example, or rather go back to the Great Depression of 1929. And this is an example I have used often. So if you follow me regularly, I'm sorry I'm repeating this example, but it just fits in beautifully with what I'm trying to say here. So once the Great Depression of 1929 started, and in fact, economists are still arguing about what led to the start of the Great Depression. I essentially believe, and I came to this conclusion while writing my Easy Money books, was the Great Depression of 1929 essentially started in October 1929 when, obviously, the Great Depression of 1929 has to start in 1929. So that is a little, it's slightly tautological. So it started when the stock markets, rather the stock market in New York started, the New York Stock Exchange started to fall in October 1929. And because people were heavily leveraged, a lot of investors lost their shirt. And then in order to sort of recover some of their losses, they started selling their holdings in the commodity markets, and then the commodity markets started to fall, and people started losing, so basically people started losing jobs all over the place. Uh, uh, Between 1929 and 1933, 4 years later, the unemployment in the US rose to 25%. Nearly 13 million Americans were unemployed. But this had a disproportionate impact on the cut down in consumer spending. Now, if you look at Ford Motor Company, which was the biggest motor company in the US at that point of time, their sales collapsed by 86% between 1929 and 1933, which was huge. So what really was happening there? What was happening was that even people who had not lost their jobs cut down on their consumption. And the reason for that was very, very simple. It was the fact that because 25% of the workforce was unemployed, everybody knew someone else who was unemployed. And the fear of getting unemployed and not finding a job all over again was so huge that people started cutting down on their consumption and saving for the rainy day. So as as Robert Shiller, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, writes in this book called Narrative Economics, those who already owned a car decided to keep the car going rather longer. Those who did not own a car decided to continue taking public transportation. So some people postponed buying a car or other major consumer items, which led to loss of jobs in the auto and consumer product industries, which led to more postponement, which led to a second round of job loss. And so, the things work. So a similar sort of dynamic is about to play out in India. In fact, it was, even before COVID-19 struck, given the fact that the Indian economy was not in great shape, has not been in great shape for now, at least 2 to 3 years. This dynamic was already working at some level, and now it will become even more stronger. So to give you to throw some numbers at you, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy has essentially, if you look at their data, as of April 12th, the unemployment in the country stood at 24%. So we are already there, 1 in 4 Indians, around 1 in 4 Indians is unemployed. We're already there at the level of Great Depression. The rate of unemployment as of March 22nd, 20 days earlier, was 8.4%. Now, the thing here, which is now, the media has talked about this over the last 10 days, about the very high rate of unemployment. But what they haven't talked about, and this makes the thing even more interesting, is something called the labor force participation rate, which has fallen dramatically from around 42.6% as of March 22nd to around 35.5% as of April 12th. What does it mean? It basically means that people have stopped looking for jobs. Many people have stopped looking for jobs, and hence the total number of people in the workforce has come down. And within that, the lesser workforce, more people are unemployed. So nearly 1 in 4, and that makes the situation even more dangerous. So technically, the rate of unemployment is actually more than 24%. But given the fact that people who stop looking for jobs do not get counted as unemployed, the rate of unemployment is at 24%. Now, the point here is that nearly 1 in 4 Indians is unemployed at a point of time, which can't be good news. Also, this is, peak Rabi harvesting season, with the country expected to produce around 130 million tons of wheat, chana, mustard, etc. The trouble is there aren't enough laborers going around to harvest this crop. So what happens is, India has a fairly migrant labor population, unlike China, where you're not allowed to move. And a lot of this migrant labor works in cities and then goes back to the villages to help during the harvesting season. Now, many such people are stuck in cities. Also, over the last few days, if you've been in Bombay, there are a lot of these SOS kind of WhatsApp forwards going around, asking people to buy, stuff like grapes and mangoes directly from farmers, in places like Nashik and all around the Konkan, and help them earn some money. Now, the supply chains have essentially collapsed, and there is no way for what is being produced to reach the end customer. So clearly there's a problem with the Indian economy. And if you've been following many economists, economists have essentially been giving this growth, very precise growth forecasts. Now, which is something I find very problematic, because we are really not in a situation wherein we know very, very clearly as to how badly this will play out. So all you can do is essentially, some rough back of the envelope calculations. And so if, the way I look at it is, with the economy being, with the country under a lockdown from April 1st to May 4th, what that basically means is that a large part of the economy will not work for around 5 weeks, at least 5 weeks during the course of this financial year. Also, a lot of this, even if we open up May 5th onwards, a lot of businesses will not recover very, very quickly. So roughly you can say that around 8 to 10% of the economic activity for 2020-21 is likely to be impacted. The thing that one can say with a little more confidence, or actually a lot more confidence, is that India will enter into a recession this year. A recession is essentially defined as a situation where an economy contracts in size for 2 consecutive quarters. So basically for a period of 6 months. So April to June 2020 is, given the fact that the economy will be under a shutdown for almost 5 weeks, so it will contract. That is basically a no-brainer. And I think there will be a spillover effect for July to September as well. Things will improve between October and December. Obviously, all this is assuming that the lockdown doesn't get extended. And things will improve October to December also, because that's the festival season and people do, sort of like to spend money at that point of time. So the point is, if I were to sort of summarize this in one line, the psychology of a recession is now more or less in place, and that will hurt us quite a lot. Now, let's look at some economic indicators for the month of March. Now, what I'm trying to do here is just to explain as to how interconnected any economy is. And because the economy is interconnected, how things move from one part of the economy to another part. And this is very important to understand. So look at March. Domestic car sales fell by around 53.3%. March 2020 vis-a-vis March 2019. Two-wheeler sales fell by around 40%, and commercial vehicle sales crashed by a whopping 88%. Now, of course, we all know that no automobile company makes everything on its own. So if car sales were to come down, they would impact, sales of companies which make tires, companies which make steel, car steerings, rubber, so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but it'll basically go down the value chain. Also, steel companies will have to stop temporarily stop production, primarily because they will run out of space where they can store the steel that they have manufactured. And other industries are also going to face similar problems. Also, it's not, from what I understand, it's not, you can't like switch on and switch off a steel plant. So it takes time to get back into activity. What will happen because of all this is power consumption will come down. Now, you might come around and tell me, but that's a good thing given the fact that a large proportion of power in India is produced by burning coal. So it sort of improves our pollution numbers. But what we need to understand, and the power consumption in March fell by around 9.2%. But what we need to understand here is, and so this is where the links become very, very interesting, is the fact that in large parts of the country, industrial users of power subsidize domestic users. And when industrial users cut down on their power consumption, the state electricity boards or the power distribution companies end up making losses. When they end up making losses, power distribution companies do not pay what they owe to power producing companies. The problem is power producing companies are heavily leveraged. They have taken on a lot of loans from banks over the last decade. So if they don't get paid, they don't pay in the end, end up servicing bank loans. So then banks are in a problem. So this is how, a crisis spreads, and this is how you understand that any economy doesn't operate in isolation. And to sort of slightly deviate here, so this sort of makes me go to the loan moratorium, wherein everyone was like, people were surprised that they would have to pay interest on the loan for a period of 3 months if they took on a moratorium. I mean, boss, if you don't pay interest on your loan, how will the bank pay interest on your fixed deposit? So, I mean, it's as simple as that. So you cannot really shut down one part of the economy and, hope that everything else will fall into place. I mean, there will be repercussions, there will be impacts in other parts of the economy. Now, getting back to the point on power, in fact, the government has already given power distribution companies a moratorium of 3 months when it comes to making payments to power generating companies. And Urjit Patel, the former RBI governor, had a very interesting thing to say on this in a column that he recently wrote in the Indian Express, where he says, and I quote, "A payments moratorium on power suppliers by government-owned electricity distributors, if media reports are correct, is a sub-sovereign default." And I agree. Of course, and a moratorium doesn't solve anything. I mean, it essentially basically postpones a problem, and you're hoping that once time has elapsed, things will automatically fall into place. But whether that happens, time will tell. The other example that I would like to give here, and I mean, I wrote a rather long piece on this for News Laundry. You guys might want to check that out. When it comes to new home sales weren't really happening any which ways, right? Now, what will also happen is that whatever little sales were happening, whatever little construction was happening, things will get worse. Who will this impact? I mean, it will obviously impact the builder. It will impact the bank from which the builder has taken on a loan, and so on. But it will also mean that informal jobs will get impacted, and informal jobs in the construction industry and the agriculture sector amount for close to 85% of informal jobs in this country, and many of these people get paid on a daily basis. So there, the troubles might just escalate. So these are a couple of links that I could think of, and I'm sure there are many such links out there, and they'll only gradually come out as we go along. Okay. Now, solution kya hai? This is something I get asked regularly on the social media, being accused of raising problems all the time and not giving solutions and so on and so forth. Now, the problem is that, I think this tendency to ask for solutions over and over again basically comes from the way our examination system is structured. And when we write exams in schools and colleges, every question has a right answer, right? So, but economics is not like that. As I, to give you a very simple example, if in mathematics, there is there is an equation of a line where y is equal to mx plus c. So if you know the values of mx and c, you know the value of y. But economics doesn't work like that. So again, to give you a sense of what is how the government and the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, India's central bank, are trying to tackle this, and why things are working and why things are not working. Now, the Reserve Bank of India has, like any other central bank, tried to flood the system, financial system, with money. The idea obviously is to drive down interest rates, encourage banks to lend more, encourage people to borrow and spend more, encourage businesses to borrow and expand more. And all this feeds back into the economy, and the economic growth recovers. Now, only if it was as simple as that. So Shaktikanta Das, the governor of the RBI, made a long sort of speech on Friday, which the basic point of it was he wanted to encourage banks to lend, which is what all RBI governors want at different points of time. Now, one of the things that he did not say in that speech, and I can't blame him for it, is the fact that non-food credit lending in 2019-20 grew at just 6.2%. This is a 26-year low. Okay, the last time non-food credit growth lending was as slow was in 1993-94. This is also the third slowest in 60 years. If you look at data from 1960-61 to 2020, 2019-20, you will find that the slowest growth in non-food credit was back in 1961-62, if I remember correctly. So this is the third slowest growth. What is non-food credit? Banks in India give a lot of loans to Food Corporation of India and other state procurement agencies to buy rice and wheat directly from farmers. Once you subtract this lending from the overall lending of banks, what remains is non-food credit. Right. So basically, the point I'm trying to make here is that bank lending was already in a mess before COVID-19 came in, and since then things have only gotten worse. Now, how do I know things have gotten worse? So basically, banks deposit their excess money which they have with the RBI. The RBI pays a certain rate of interest to them on this, and this is called the reverse repo rate. So on February 20th, the banks had deposited 39,983 crore with the RBI through the reverse repo window. By April 12th, this had exploded to 7,01,699 crore, an increase of 1,655%. As of April 16th, which is the last data point available, the total amount of money deposited by banks with the RBI under the reverse repo window stood at 6,99,312 crore. So the point is, I mean, the only reason I'm throwing all these, big numbers at you is the fact that the RBI, the banking system has enough money to lend, but it isn't. Now, what did the RBI do about it? Mr. Shaktikanta Das did was he cut the reverse repo rate. So he cut the reverse repo rate from around 4% to 3.75%. So basically, the message he was trying to send to the banks is that, guys, you need to go out there and lend. And how he sort of, the incentive here was that the rate of interest that banks would earn by parking their money with the RBI has been deducted by 25 basis points. So the point is, but will the banks lend? And I think the banks are not going to lend, and there are multiple reasons for it. The first reason for it is, and this is something that we seem to have forgotten, is that the bad loans rate of banks continues to remain very, very high. if you were to look at data for September 2019, which is the latest data available, the bad loans rate of the entire Indian banking system was at 9.3%. So which basically means that for every 1,000 rupees of loans given by banks, 93 rupees haven't been repaid by borrowers for a period of 90 days or more. And the bad loans rate for public sector banks was at an even higher 12.7%. So the point here is that we are still paying for the mistakes that we made by expanding banking credit after the last financial crisis, which happened in 2008 struck. So once the financial crisis of 2008 started, public sector banks were essentially encouraged to lend more. And during the process of doing this, they ended up giving loans to many corporates who they shouldn't have. And those decisions are still haunting us. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the banks which had sort of bankrolled the economy at when the last financial crisis happened are really not in a position to bankroll the economy as of now, because that mess continues. Okay. The other point that we need to understand is that there is a great deal of uncertainty right now. You and I and even banks and bankers do not know how badly this is going to go. So in that situation, it makes sense for banks to be conservative, because ultimately, other than lending money, the banks are also responsible to the depositors from whom they have borrowed money, right? Return of capital is more important than return on capital. I mean, if I were to use a very cliched phrase here. Also, what has happened is that, as I said, bank lending was already at a 26-year low. And why was that the case? That was the case because one, obviously, people and businesses are not in the mood to borrow. Many businesses are not in the position to borrow. And banks, if you look at credit data very carefully, are not willing to lend to corporates. The only part of the business which continues to be very, very robust is retail banking. And the funny thing is that what will happen now is that the pressure on retail banking will go up, and I will not be surprised that once the lockdown ends, we'll all be bombarded with many more calls from telemarketing agents of banks offering us credit cards, consumer durable loans and personal loans and vehicle loans and whatnot. So there is a certain problem with the Indian banking system, and it clearly is not the lack of liquidity or the lack of money to lend. So the RBI can basically keep doing whatever it is, but I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. So, so to sort of summarize this section at the risk of another cliche, as the old saying goes, you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink. So that is, that is the long and the short of it. The RBI can create all that liquidity that it can, but the question is whether the banks will lend or they won't. And as of now, it doesn't look like they'll lend. So what's the way out of all this? Again, solutions. Now, in a situation where the private sector is not sort of ready to spend, banks are not willing to lend. John Maynard Keynes, we go back to John Maynard Keynes, and the world goes back to John Maynard Keynes whenever there is an economic crisis. Basically, Keynes had suggested that the government should become the spender of the last resort. In fact, Keynes was, unlike the economists of today, he was great at rhetoric. And one of the points that he made was that the government should even go to the extent of digging holes and filling them up. And the idea being that, when workers were paid for digging holes and paying them up, they'll sort of go out and spend that money, and that would help businesses. Consumer spending would revive, economic incomes would revive, and the economy would, sort of revive as well. So the government is working along those lines. It has decided to pay rupees 500 per month into female Jan Dhan accounts for a period of 3 months. The total bill for this works out to 30,600 crore. Many people have been appalled at the fact that 500 rupees is so low, but you need to understand the fact that 500 rupees is 500 rupees more than 0 rupees, right? Also, I mean, having said that, I feel that this wasn't really the time to have discriminated between men and women, and money should have gone into all Jan Dhan accounts. And so if the government had sort of paid 1,000 rupees per month for a period of 3 months, the bill for that would have run to around rupees 1,14,240 crore. What the government has also done is it has brought forward the payment to the first installment of PM Kisan. Payments to be made under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme have been increased. The payments under the scheme which were held up have also been released. Income tax refunds have been released. Some of you would have probably gotten your refunds. I think the other important thing that the government needs to be doing right now is to be at all levels, it should be clearing its outstanding bills very, very quickly. Now, this will put more money in the hands of people. Food entitlements made available through the public distribution system have been increased over April to June. This is a good move, and I think this needs to be extended at least till September because of the simple fact that the Food Corporation of India has massive stocks of rice and wheat. So if you look at data as of March 2020, the Food Corporation of India had around 585 lakh tons of rice and wheat when the requirement was around 214 lakh tons. So, it was obviously massively overstocked. So the FCI is clearly in a position to give away some of this stock and help the country at large. Now, another simple suggestion that I'd sort of which I think will help quite a lot is a simple change in the goods and services tax. Now, for people who pay GST, they will know that GST currently needs to be paid as after an invoice is raised, irrespective of the fact whether the payment has been made by the customer or not. Now, obviously, people have found ways to go around this, but given that if we all follow the law of the land, so this needs to be changed where people need to pay GST only once after the payment has been received. So this will obviously help in in freeing up a lot of working capital. Now, in all this, from whatever solutions which have been done, which have been implemented, the corporates are really not happy. Okay, they have been a terribly unhappy lot, and given the fact that they're not really used to speaking their minds, at least not in front of the government, not openly, a lot of them have spoken their minds in the recent past. But what they forget is that corporate tax rates were only cut dramatically as late as last year. So it's not like the government hasn't helped them. Now, the funny thing is, and I'm no socialist, I find it very, very, amusing that capitalists who otherwise want lesser government all the time want to be bailed out by the government the moment they smell an economic crisis brewing. Now, and this is something I'd like to quote. This came from a gentleman called Niranjan Hiranandani. He's the president of the industry body of real estate developers, NAREDCO, and the business lobby ASSOCHAM, or ASSOCAM, or however you pronounce it. So he said we need stimulus of over $200 billion. Okay, $200 billion, not rupees. Please mark my words. With an ability to go up to $300 billion. With $100 billion provided immediately, $100 billion in 4 months, and the last $100 billion in 8 months. Okay. Now let's just do some basic math here. Okay. Now this is where it gets interesting. Now let's assume $1 is worth 76 rupees and 30 paisa. Now it's obviously a little more now, but this was the value of the dollar on the day I did this calculation. So $200 billion amounts to rupees 15.26 lakh crore, or 15.26 trillion. 300 billion amounts to rupees 22.89 lakh crore. Now, to give you a sense of proportion, the central government hopes to earn rupees 24.23 lakh crore as gross tax revenue in 2020-21. Now, as you would all know, a certain proportion of these revenues needs to be shared with the state governments. So the net tax revenue that the central government hopes to earn stands at 16.36 lakh crore. And what Hiranandani is demanding, a minimum of is 15.26 lakh crore. So, it's safe to say that Hiranandani basically wants the government to spend 100%, almost 100% of its taxes, or even more, in providing an economic stimulus. I can still understand where he was coming from, but what surprised me more was even venture capital funded startups, which have blown up a whole lot of money over the last few years, wanted the government to pay 50% of their salary bills and contract wage bills for the period April to September. I mean, socialism is alive and kicking. Airlines in India want to be bailed out because American government is bailing out American airlines. And believe you me, all this has just started. Now, of course, if the government started bailing out VC-funded companies, it will be a huge joke. Now, what really irritates me is when companies like Uber, which have close to $10 billion cash on their books, accept us to donate money to help its driving partners. I mean, it just irritates me no end. I mean, do they think that people are essentially idiots or what? So the point I'm trying to make is, and as Dr. Raghuram Rajan wrote in his, wrote a book in 2003 with a gentleman called Luigi Zingales, and his book was called "Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists," and this is precisely the situation to do so, where the government should not give in to exaggerated demands from corporates and try and put more and more money in the hands of people. Let money be put in the hands of people, let them decide what they want to do with it. Also, having said that, this comes with one point that the government needs to figure out innovative ways of helping small and medium enterprises. Government needs to figure out viable ways of, the government needs to figure out innovative ways of helping viable small and medium enterprises. Dr. Rajan had a very interesting proposal on this front in a recent column in the Times of India, wherein he said that the government should accept responsibility for the first loss in incremental bank loans made to an SME up to the quantum of income taxes paid by the SME in the past year. Now, the question is, everyone says the government should do this, the government should do that, but I still haven't found anyone essentially telling us in reasonably good detail, except probably Dr. Ratin Roy at NIPFP, who has made a few very interesting proposals, that how and where is this money going to come from? So one of the proposals that Dr. Roy has made is that the government should issue bonds, and these bonds will essentially keep paying interest for an unlimited period of time, even though the principal will never be repaid. So these are called consols and typically tend to be issued during wartime. But the point is, the Indian government is already very stretched on the financial front. Now, one of the points that I've sort of regularly made is that the real fiscal deficit, and fiscal deficit is essentially the difference between what a government earns and what it spends, in the Indian case is close to 10% of the GDP. And this includes not just the fiscal deficit of the central government, which is reported to be at 3.8% of the GDP, but the fiscal deficits of the state governments, the off-budget borrowing of the central government, and the borrowings of the public sector. Now, what will happen this year is that tax collections will collapse, okay? And as T.N. Nayan wrote in his column yesterday in the Business Standard, the governments at the center and state will be lucky to get away with a 10 to 15% tax shortfall, which will mean a loss of up to rupees 5 trillion, which is again 5 lakh crore. So the fiscal deficit, properly calculated, will balloon to levels never seen in our history, certainly worse than the situation in 1991. And Nayan doesn't really write stuff just like that. So if it's coming from him, one needs to take it seriously. Anant Narayan, a professor at the SP Jain Institute here in Mumbai, writes, on the back of sharply lower receipts, the total borrowing figure could go up to 16% of the GDP. So the government essentially finances the fiscal deficit by borrowing money. So what Narayan is essentially saying is that fiscal deficit could go up to 16% of the GDP, which is a huge number. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the government doesn't have much of a legroom when it comes to money. Now, one thing that needs to be done very quickly is to postpone any trophy projects, like the building of the new Delhi. I mean, this is not the time to do it. Also, all the excess procurement of rice and wheat by the government through Food Corporation of India, which primarily helps the rich farmers, needs to take a backseat this year. And the money needs to be sort of deployed to fight the negative economic consequences of COVID-19. Now, so what has happened is that, given the fact that the government is financially stretched, many people are now suggesting that the government should print money. Now, what that basically, the government doesn't print money, the RBI does. So the RBI prints money, buys government bonds, and hands over the money to the government. Now, if you're the kind who learns his or her economics on Twitter, you will see economists, a few economists, and almost every stock market wala asking the government to print money and spend. Now, of course, this suggestion comes from what is happening in the Western economies and a very rudimentary reading of a new a new part in economics known as the modern monetary theory. Now, why can't we just copy the West? Why can't we copy America? Is a question I get often asked on Twitter. Now, so I'll try answering this briefly, given that this is a complicated question and I mean it's a different topic altogether. The problem with printing money in the normal scheme of things is that it can cause inflation, given the fact that more and more money chases the same amount of goods and services. But the danger of that happening right now is rather low, given the fact that demand has crashed. And also, if you look at the capacity utilization rates of India's manufacturing companies, and this is during the period October to December, which is the latest data available, it had crashed to an all-time low level. So there was, demand was already low even before the COVID-19 crisis started. So the chances of inflation due to money printing are rather low. So then the question is, why should, what should stop us? The one thing that should stop us is the fact that there is a very good chance of a rating downgrade if the government decides to print a lot of money in order to spend. Now, also we need to realize the fact that currently the Indian rating is just on the border of being investment grade. One downgrade will put us in the non-investment grade, leading to a lot of foreign money leaving our stock market as well as our bond market. So this will lead to, the rupee losing value against the dollar. It will lead to bond yields going up. It will lead to interest rates going up, and it will generally make the macroeconomic environment even more shaky, which is something we need to avoid at this point of time. As Dr. Rajan writes, a ratings downgrade coupled with a loss of investor confidence could lead to a plummeting exchange rate and a dramatic increase in long-term rates in this environment, and substantial losses for our financial institutions. Also, and this is something that comes out of my Easy Money books, it is worth remembering that the American dollar has an exorbitant privilege which the Indian rupee doesn't. Okay, the dollar is looked at as a safe haven, and the money keeps going back to the US. In fact, something that I would like to share here was, I think in 2011, one of the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, decided to downgrade America's AAA rating. Now, when America's AAA rating was downgraded, what that should have led to was that money should have left America. In fact, what happened was exactly the opposite. Money left all parts of the world and went back to America. So as Urjit Patel recently wrote, the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar not only endures, it is reinforced during a crisis. So these factors essentially mean that the government will have to be very careful with printing money, as well as going overboard with borrowing it. Okay, the bad state of the Indian economy, even before the COVID-19 crisis struck, will come back to sort of bite it, or haunt it at least, if not. Long story short, people and businesses will suffer. This is a big crisis, and the ability of the government to do much is extremely limited. In fact, to be very honest, whatever little they have done up until now has been decent, except for the fact that the way they handled the entire migrant crisis without really thinking through the problem. Anyone who suggests otherwise, given that that things will be fine in 6 months or whatever, or achhe din aane wale hain, is essentially bluffing. And so I would like to end this with a couplet, and I'd like to thank my friend Mohit for suggesting the right couplet. And this is by a poet called Anjum Khalik, and this is how it goes. So मेरी प्यास का दोनों तरफ इलाज नहीं. So मेरी प्यास का दोनों तरफ इलाज नहीं. Pyas is thirst, इलाज is treatment, medicine. So मेरी प्यास का दोनों तरफ इलाज नहीं, उधर एक समुंदर है, इधर इधर है सारा नहीं. I got it wrong. Sorry. So मेरी प्यास का दोनों तरफ इलाज नहीं, उधर एक समुंदर है, इधर शराब है. Now, what it essentially means is sarab is essentially a mirage. So basically, one side there is the sea, and on the other side there is a mirage. So things are equally difficult on both the sides. So this is what I had to say. I mean, I also had a section on personal finance, but given that we've sort of actually gone much beyond what we had decided on, what I'll do is I'll try incorporating whatever I had to say on personal finance while answering all your questions. So,
just as an intervention, would you like to spend 10 minutes on personal
sure. I don't have a problem. Sure, I'll do.
Vikram, why don't we allow him to spend 10 minutes?
Quite a few questions on personal finance.
Yeah.
So,
but let it be a structured. Go ahead, Vivek. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sure. Right. So again, if you've been sort of following me on the social media or been following my writing, I have sort of given a few basic tips on what you need to do on the personal finance front. And this is something that is true at any point of time. It's not just, it's not just a crisis should get you to do this. First and foremost, and I think which is one of the most important things is that we should all sort of start building an emergency fund if we haven't already, and ideally, or rather at least at bare minimum, it should be 3 months of your expenses, and if it's more than that, it's even better. Now, money, the thing with money is saving money is it's not just about facing an emergency. It's also about making better decisions in life. God forbid if you were to be fired in the months to come and you have some money in the bank, then you will be in a better position to sort of negotiate, your next job. And you don't have to take on the first job that gets offered to you because you have no money in the bank. The third thing that I would like to sort of, and this is a question that a friend recently asked me, is should he continue with his SIPs or should he pay his credit card dues first? Now, obviously, ideally, both things should happen, but in a world where there is only so much money and different things need to be done, I think the credit card dues need to be paid off first, simply because the interest is higher than 20% per year, and it just compounds at a very, very rapid pace. And before you know it, the amount has reached a level where you will not be able to pay it. Hence, it makes immense sense to pay off your credit card debt. Also, again, this is a simple point: prioritize loans. Try to repay loans which have a higher rate of interest. And I find it mind-boggling that people have credit card debts, people have personal loans, and at the same time they have money in their savings bank account which is earning a rate of interest of now even less than 3%. So if you have money in your savings bank account, and if you have a credit card debt, if you have a personal loan debt, please repay it first. Also, again, asset allocation is very, very important in life. Many people have have started realizing the importance of the humble fixed deposit in the last 1 month as the stock market has crashed. So even though interest rates on FDs have fallen even further, it makes immense sense to have some amount of money in your bank to sort of take care of a rainy day. Also, the other thing with asset allocation is that all your money doesn't get stuck in illiquid assets like real estate. So there are people who are who have a lot of money but they don't have liquidity. So liquidity is equally important. In the months to come, minimize your discretionary expenditure. And I mean, I say this seriously as well as sarcastically. I find a lot of people get a lot of meaning in life by spending money. And there are people who find meaning in life by traveling. So at the end of the day, how much is one mountain different from another, or one sea beach different from another? In the time to come, discretionary expenditure will have to take a backseat. Holidays will have to wait. Mobile phones, a 10,000 rupee mobile phone has the same features as a 30, 40, 50,000 rupee mobile phone. There is WhatsApp on both the phones, and both the phones allow you to call. You can also access internet on both the phones. So uh, build a checklist of things you've spent your money on in the last 1 year. Download your bank statement, go through it. Download your credit card statement, go through it, scrutinize it very, very carefully. You will be surprised, and when you realize that a lot of these things you really didn't need, and people are already realizing that now that they've been at home for more than a month. Now I can see books all around me, where I am, and a lot of these books I'm never going to read, but it just felt so nice when I was buying them. So also, there's no point in having half a dozen credit cards, debit cards. The problem is, more the number of cards you have, more is the temptation to spend. And this is simply because the pain of spending plastic money is not the same as the pain of spending cash. And this is very well documented. There's a lot of research behind this. Also, if you really want to sort of minimize the money that you spend, it is best to carry cash around with you all the time. So even though the government and the banks want you to go digital, cash has its own uses. Also, this is something a lot of people don't tend to know. Be careful with the fact that you don't need to have your savings bank account and your credit card with the same bank, because somewhere in the fine print, if you default on the credit card payment, you have allowed the bank to access your savings bank account. Now, of course, this is not to suggest that people are trying to default on their credit card outstandings, but it's generally a good practice to follow. Make sure that you have nominees on all your mutual fund investments, insurance policies, and bank accounts. Also have details of all your investments and bank accounts on a sheet of paper or a Word file. Tell someone in your family exactly where it is located. Now, this is something that I need to do. I haven't. Okay. No, this is something that I sort of, also mentioned in what I said earlier, that bank credit growth has, slowed down majorly in the last 1 year, and it will slow down even more. So the retail loans, the banks will, put great pressure on giving out more retail loans. And in the months to come, the sales pitch of banks will get, better, and you'll get more calls offering you personal loans, credit cards, and so on. So try and resist the temptation. And I think finally, what I'll say is be good to your parents, be good to your in-laws, be good to your siblings, because they might have to either take you in or bail you out. Also, be good to your spouse, because this is the time when you really need to work together as a team. And I mean, as I said, remember, everything doesn't have a solution. Just because the exam questions that we answered had one. So that's it. Thanks, Ajay.
Thanks, Vivek.
Thanks, Vivek. Before Vikram and Chandana take over, just wanted to say that there were 330 participants here on this, and there were about 200 parallel on YouTube.
Great.
So good participation, and it was a terrific talk. Over to the moderators.
Vivek, thank you. I know that complex issues cannot have simple solutions, but they can have simple explanations. And I think that's what you achieved with the 500, 600 of us who was listening to you. And I could relate to each one of your explaining what's happening, even though I am not an economist. And I must thank you for that.
Even I'm not an economist, though I claim to be one these days. So.
There are almost about 200, 250 questions, and obviously we counting everyone. We have chosen a few, and I crave the indulgence of the others if we cannot choose you. It's just because of lack of time, but we will definitely take all of you depending on how it progresses. The first question I have from Tanmay Shetty is that how is this distress selling of crops by the farmers currently going to impact the spending cycle? We already have a pretty bad rural economy, and how is it going to change the spending cycle? And has this been accounted when we were tracking GDP?
See, the point is there are two things. One is, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence on this, right? Because all of us have read these stories on how, farmers have basically had to dump tomatoes, grapes, and so on, depending on which part of the country they are in. Now, the problem is obviously there's no way to agglomerate and come up with a number as to these are the losses. The second thing is the GDP actually calculates the value of the production. Now, whether that production is selling or not is not a problem that they concern themselves with. So, yeah.
There is a question, there are two related questions. One is that how do you see India vis-a-vis the global markets, especially with respect to one anonymous attendee says, how will the Fed printing $2.3 trillion affect the Indian economy and the Indian stock market? And what's happening in US cannot be ignored in India. And can you just connect these two?
So basically, see, if the last that I looked at Fed's balance sheet was last week, I needed to do it before this thing when I forgot. So the last that I checked, I saw that the balance sheet was at around a little more than $6 trillion, and it had expanded by 46% in a very short period of around 40 days. So what that tells you is that the Fed is printing money and buying bonds big time. And they are on an unlimited money printing program, wherein the idea is to obviously print money, buy bonds, and pump that money into the financial system, drive down interest rates, and help people, consume more and so on. And this is something which has been happening for the last 12 years. Now, what this has led to is, while consumption, etc., has improved a little, what it has done is that it has provided Wall Street with a lot of easy money, which they can borrow at rock bottom interest rates and invest in stock markets, bond markets, real estate markets all around the world. And that is something that now will go up. Now, the funny thing is, and there is very little data on this, because it's just been happening for around 40 days, is that in the last 40 days, not a lot of that money has come into India. So it's probably gone into, the more developed stock markets. But my thing is, and I even wrote about this, I think around a week back, that as if the Fed is on an unlimited money printing program, and so, there are other central banks also which are printing a lot of money, some of it will eventually come into India. At least in the short term, the stock market should look good. But, this is at best a guess, predicting which way the market will go is a mug's game. So
actually, many people ask me this question, and I want you to just take a small class for all of us. How is this printing money transmitted to the people? Can you just tell us?
Yeah, sure. So basically what happens is, see, nobody really prints money now, okay? It is all created digitally. But the point is, when I say money is created digitally, it just doesn't have the same impact as saying money is being printed. Now, what it means is that the Federal Reserve obviously has a computer somewhere wherein it sort of, inputs something and the money supply goes up, okay? Now, the thing is that how does the government ensure that this money essentially is pumped into the financial system, right? I mean, it cannot take that money and throw it out of helicopters. I mean, that's not possible. So what it does is the Federal Reserve essentially buys bonds. Okay? It buys bonds from all kinds of market participants. And when it buys bonds, it pays them with this freshly created money, which is digital, which is largely digital. And then there's this money that sort of goes into the financial system. The money supply goes up. And because money supply goes up, interest rates tend to come down. And when interest rates come down, the hope is people will borrow and spend more, businesses will borrow and expand more.
So the integral part of this money expansion is the ability of corporates and individuals to borrow from the banking system. And if right now the sentiment is weak and people just don't want to borrow, printing money may not have the same effect as what you desire.
Yeah, of course. But then see, which is why I said, macroeconomics at the end of the day, and especially if you look at monetary policy, has a very limited set of solutions. And most of these solutions ultimately boil down to the fact that, you sort of create a situation where interest rates come down and hope that people will borrow and spend more. See, what also happens is, because we are talking, let me just expand this a little bit. So, when the Federal Reserve first started printing money in the aftermath of the financial crisis, the hope was precisely what I have explained, right? People will borrow more, spend, companies will borrow more, spend, expand. Now, people, obviously, there was a problem because they were already coming out of one round of borrowing binge, which had caused the financial crisis of 2008, because they borrowed to buy real estate and then, burn their fingers there. So there was a gap of at least 3 to 4 years between when the Fed started to print money and when people actually started to borrow money all over again. Now, the funny thing is with corporates. Now, what happened with corporates is the corporates, instead of borrowing money and expanding, what they did was they borrowed money and they bought back their shares. So when they bought back their shares, the number of shares in available in the public domain in the market went down. And when the number of shares went down, the earnings per share went up. And in expectation of this, stock prices rallied. So essentially, in the last, this has been happening for almost a decade. A lot of American companies have ended up borrowing a lot of money to drive up their share prices. Now, the problem is now, and it's all haunting them right now, because now they don't have cash on their books and they are heavily leveraged, and in process, they have to fire their employees. So, which is why if you look at the unemployment rate in the US, some economists are now saying, and this is, the April numbers are not, will obviously come out at the end of April. Some economists are now saying that the unemployment rate in the US is now higher than the Great Depression. So, as I said, one is, there are no, solutions can go in unexpected directions. And,
Yeah. Two more questions before I hand it over to the Facebook. On Facebook, we are having a parallel set of questions.
Sure.
But just two more questions. One is Shantasena asks, why not just cut defense expenditure, stop buying planes, stop building the New Delhi Parliament, stop giving subsidies, because in any case, government is subsidizing in another form. Are there sources of cutting expenditure and still be able to somehow balance the budget?
Okay, so if you look at India's defense expenditure over the years as a proportion of GDP, it's actually come down. So it's not like it's going up. So there is not, and most of it is you're paying salaries and stuff like that. So you can't really cut defense expenditure on that front. The other thing is, as I said, yes, this entire new Delhi which is being built, that can take a back seat. Whether it will, I don't know. So there are areas. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm sure there are areas where expenditure can be cut. One example, as I said, was that the Food Corporation of India has ended up overbuying rice and wheat over the years, and they don't, they buy rice and wheat, and then they distribute it through the food distribution, through the public distribution system. But the amount of rice and wheat that they've been buying is much more than what they need to maintain food security in the country. So there's, so this one particular year, there can be a cut, but then again, it's not politically feasible. So.
Pradipto Chatterjee asks this question. The government of India has, to my understanding, to cash in on the public's mood, suddenly started riding on the rhetoric of Make in India push and stop Chinese goods. How do you see that thing played, actually considering the botched up GST and the demo in that context, and the recent circular of landlocked China investments, neighboring investments?
This is a separate discussion in itself. What I would suggest is, I'll answer the question, but what I'll also suggest is that the gentleman, I wrote a piece in the Mint a while back on why protectionism is always a bad idea. So I would suggest that he reads that. Now, to answer the question, what will happen is, obviously, there'll be a lot of nationalism, which will, and it's already started to happen, which will take over the debate, and people will say stuff like we shouldn't buy from China and we should buy from India and encourage our own industries and stuff like that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that so here is how it is. So why do you think people are buying stuff from China? Okay, no one's forcing them, right? People are buying stuff from China because quality is good, things are available at a better price vis-a-vis what is available in India. Okay, so value for money. So no one's forcing anyone to buy stuff from China. Now the question is, can we produce at a same quality product at the Chinese price? No. So if we start producing in India by sort of blocking Chinese imports, what will eventually happen is the prices of things will go up. Okay. Now when prices of things will go up, people will prioritize, right? So if you buy something, you will not buy something else. So at the end of the day, net, the impact on the Indian industry will not be the same. The Indian industry will remain the same, because people will end up paying more for products, and in that process, they'll end up cutting down on their if they buy one thing, they'll not buy something else. So, the idea should not be to sort of cut down on Chinese imports and stuff like that. The idea should be to become more productive in India. So, before Make in India, we need something like be productive in India, which is currently missing, and which then goes back to our age-old debate of our infrastructure and our land laws and our labor laws and our banking system and the way the government treats businesses. So, see, the problem with the average Indian politician is that he does not trust business, when it comes to doing business. But when it comes to needing money to finance the political system, he's perfectly fine. So then we're getting into broader philosophical issues which really do not have straightforward answers. So.
The keeping in policy of Manthan, smarter people should deal with Facebook. Now, Chandana, it's your turn.
Well, Vivek, there are lots of questions also on YouTube, so we won't be able to take all the questions. I've chosen a few. There is one, I think, which is on the minds of a lot of people. I know you've spoken about this, but even then a reiteration would be good. This is from Dr. Rajiv Nair. He says, my retirement corpus has been dented by 30%, which was an equity-oriented MF. Now, with about 6-7 years to go for cessation of professional income, should I stay invested or exit to FD, etc.? If so, when to exit? Related question is from Lakshmi Narayana. What's your call on investment in gold in future?
So, to first answer the question of gentlemen approaching retirement, I think Ajay had shared this question last night, and I was thinking about it. See, the problem is, which is why I said, asset allocation is very, very important. Now, if you are approaching retirement, and as you approach retirement, your investments in equity should sort of come down, and your investment in fixed deposits, etc., should go up. But given that the gentleman has not done that, and I really don't have a straightforward answer for this, but what I think he can be doing is that in the years to come, the fresh investments need to be made more on the bank deposit side, and hope and pray that the stock market recovers and he recovers his losses, because I really don't have a straightforward answer for that. Gold, I've always been a believer in gold for the simple reason that gold is essentially a metal which helps us hedge against what our governments do. And but again, having said that, you can't bet your life on gold because it's a very volatile asset class, goes up and down very fast, doesn't move for years at end. But in the scenario that we are in currently, gold is an excellent play on the fact that the rupee will sort of lose value against the dollar, simply because gold, we produce very little gold in India, and gold is primarily bought and sold internationally in dollar terms. And the fact that every government in the world is printing money, so by that very thing, a lot of people, investors, are moving to gold in order to hedge their portfolios. So gold should be a part of your portfolio, but it's not. You can't bet. You can't be investing 100% or 50% or even 30% of your money in gold. At best, 10 to 15%, even at the upper end of your portfolio, can be gold. So.
Another question from Uzramma. How can the banking system be made more democratic and accessible to small borrowers?
Oh, Bob, this is a PhD topic in itself. I don't know. I really am not. I don't have an answer for it. Sorry.
We'll move to the next question. It says, Srishti asks this. We usually talk about daily wage earners, farmers. Of course, they are going to suffer, but the most suffering set will be the lower middle class, those who earn between 10,000 and 15,000 a month. How are they expected to manage?
So as I said, the aim of the different governments all across the country should be to put money in the hands of, more and more money in the hands of people. Now, obviously, the problem is how do you clearly target a certain section of the society? Currently, our systems are not structured to do that. So the only thing you can obviously do in this scenario is essentially to, as I said, to put more money in the hands of people. And then, you should, it also depends on where these low and middle class people are employed. So it is, I guess it's up to the middle class now, which employs these people as, as drivers, as maids, as cooks, to treat them well and not sort of start, just because they have, they don't sort of work for a month or two, you start docking their salaries, and people are doing all that. And this is something that, there is no, there is no government level solution, but the solution needs to emerge at a societal level where we need to be doing, as a society, we need to be doing the right thing. So whether we do it or not, I don't know. So.
A related anonymous question is, do we have to pay salary for the lockdown period, or can we adjust the number of days lost by working extra on future Sunday holidays, etc.?
If you are in a position to pay, you should pay. I understand that a lot of businesses are stretched and, cash is a problem and money is not coming in. And I don't want to, I'm not the kind who sort of believes in, the government making it mandatory. Like, I think there was a recommendation by the Maharashtra government a couple of days back that landlords should not take rent. It was a recommendation. They didn't have any way to implement it. But even a recommendation, every landlord is in a different situation. There are landlords whose houses run on money which comes from rent. There are landlords who are paying EMIs out of it. So I think this is something that has to be left to the society at large to negotiate and figure out an answer to. I don't think any government intervention is going to help. So,
Anindo Ghosh writes, could reducing inequalities through taxing the super rich and redistribution of wealth be a way to increase necessary consumption for the poorer half and reduce avoidable, unsustainable consumption of the upper middle class and rich?
This is a dream that people have. This is a dream that people have had for many years. This is a dream that Jawaharlal Nehru had. This is a dream that Indira Gandhi had. It's not possible. For the simple, look at, how things were before 1991. Okay. And I can give you an example here. I think it was in the budget speech of 1970 or 1971. I don't remember the exact year. Yashwantrao Chauhan, who was the finance minister at that point of time, essentially introduced a highest marginal tax rate of 97.75%. So, which basically meant that if you were earning more than 1 lakh rupees during that course of that financial year, anything over 1 lakh would be taxed at 98%. So the moment you come up with these atrocious tax rates, all you're doing is driving the economy underground. I think a better idea is to essentially make our tax system more simple, encourage people to pay taxes, and then go about it. This idea about taxing the super rich, and I think it's rubbish. And the super rich have all kinds of options. They don't need to continue staying in India. They can move to Dubai. They can move to so many other countries in the world, which would be happy to give them a citizenship at a very, very basic, minimal payment. And so high tax rates are always a horrible, terrible, bad idea.
Rishin Panchal asks, after the lockdown, can you tell us in detail about the sectors that would be the most affected? And the second question, also related, Mohit Kabra writes, what can small businesses do to save themselves, and what people in general can do to get the economy going?
I forward the first question.
Okay. After the lockdown, which are the sectors that would be most?
So I think, some of the sectors, the service sectors will be badly impacted. Multiplexes, hotels, restaurants, retail chains, anything which there, some sort of social isolation needs to be practiced. Then there are obviously discretionary items which people will not, people will postpone buying cars, two-wheelers, homes, all this kind of stuff. And I think banking will also take a beating, given that there will be more and more defaults. One thing that hadn't happened with Indian banks up until now is that the retail default rates were very, very low. And that, I think, will definitely pick up. What small businesses can do, I'm really not the right guy to answer that. What I can and you and I can do is basically essentially be careful with the way we spend our money, try having, a fund for the rainy day, as I said.
On a related question, Vivek, there's a question here from Krishnan. saying that could the merger of the banks, what the impact, and could it have been postponed because they'll now be distracted by reasons of organization, whereas
Yes. I agree 100%. In fact, I mean, I think mergers of public sector banks are in itself a very bad idea. And I mean, for all the spin around it, it's basically the only reason the government is doing it is to essentially hide the worst banks with banks which are doing a little better. So it's like Dena Bank, which had a bad loans rate, if I remember correctly, of around 22%, being merged with Bank of Baroda, which had a bad loans rate of 12%, and Vijaya Bank, which was actually a pretty decently performing government bank and had a bad loans rate of around 6% or 7%. So it's a bad idea, and I think the recent mergers should have been postponed because merging one organization is difficult. You're merging four organizations into one organization, and it needs a certain amount of managerial bandwidth, time, and this is not the time to be. I mean, this is the time to sort of figure out banks to figure out which are the loans it should be giving, which are the loans it should not be giving, rather than get stuck with all these administrative hassles, related to a merger.
So in that context, then we will stop discussing about this bad bank creation, is it? I mean, because there's a concept that we should have created a bad bank, shifted all NPS there, and continue with life.
So this is, I mean, see, I have a book coming up. In fact, my book, Bad Money, which is a book on banks, would have released on April 13th, but I mean, obviously it did not. So there is a long section where I discuss this, and I am not a great fan of, see, what you're doing is essentially moving bad loans from one public sector entity to another public sector entity. Now, the incentives in the public sector, whether it is a good bank or a bad bank, continue to remain the same. So it wouldn't have worked.
Yes, Andra.
Yeah. So Vignesh Subramaniam writes, even if we all get back to normal and all businesses are open, will India be particularly affected given the mismanagement at all levels during the crisis, similar to demonetization?
So what is the question?
The question is about misgovernance and mismanagement. Will that not affect, even if things were to get back to normal? Is it going to be hunky-dory?
That is a given, right? I mean, that's not something that has changed or is likely to change. So yes, I mean, so the factors that have sort of impacted us badly with, when it comes to the limited state capacity of our governments will continue to impact us. Now, I mean, look at the entire, this entire debate around the lockdown, right? Now, why is, every government so much in favor of a lockdown? I mean, obviously, if you think of it from an incentive point of view, it makes sense for every government to continue with the lockdown, because no politician wants to be accused of, lifting the lockdown and then suddenly the rate of, people dying due to COVID-19 going up. But that part is understandable. But even without that, I mean, the reason that every government wants to extend the lockdown is because our public health infrastructure is absolutely in the pits, and there is no way that it is in a position to, take, if the number of cases spike, there's no way it can handle it. In fact, there was this story I think in the Mumbai Mirror today, wherein a person right here in Worli, where I am, who was having trouble breathing, was taken to 8 different hospitals, and all of them refused him, refused to take him in, and he died. So, I mean, we're barely starting. So
there is a question here, which says that this Vivad Vishwas scheme, where the government has, after all, government has not budgeted for input from that scheme. Don't you think that this is the time when they should give a higher discount and then go ahead with a scheme like that?
Tricky question. I mean, I am never in favor of these kind of schemes for the simple reason that they hurt in the longer term, in the sense that you are essentially telling the person who's paid his taxes regularly and rightfully over the years that you've been stupid. Having said that, yes, I mean, the need of the hour is to sort of look at things innovatively, and if this brings in some amount of money, then so be it. I mean, because the government is going to need lots and lots of money. I mean, as you know, as Nainan said, wrote in his piece, the taxes are going to fall by 5 lakh crores at, once you take both central and state governments into account. So yes, so I think that all that will start to happen once they start to relax the lockdown, because they will need money from wherever they can raise it.
So,
sorry.
good.
Huh?
Yes, Chandra, go ahead.
Ramarao Velluri writes, referring to your Baba analogy, what is the effect on public transport? Will cycles make a comeback, not only because of COVID-related issues, but also to ensure saving by the middle class whose jobs are at stake? If people can walk 300 kilometers, then surely some can cycle 15 kilometers per trip.
What will make a comeback? Cycles.
Cycles.
I mean, have you seen Indian roads? I mean, you can't even walk. Where will you cycle? I mean, the chances of you being knocked down in the first week of your cycling itself are so high that cycles are not going to make a comeback. Don't worry about that. So,
there is a question from Saira Mocherla. What is the estimate of the government, state and federal contractual dues to corporates as well as refunds due? And what's the possibility that government will now establish a separate line of credit offering financing against security of such uncontested dues? Obviously, the government owes a lot of money to corporates. I'm sure to discounts and various and they don't pay.
To be very honest, I haven't seen a overall number anywhere, and I don't know. But it runs into a few lakh crores. That is easy to say. Now, whether they'll sort of set up a separate financing line where you're allowed to sort of discount these, I don't know. I mean, this is something only Miss Nirmala Sitharaman can tell us, or someone senior in the finance ministry bureaucracy.
Yeah, that's right. Then is there any, also central government is announcing schemes, but actually they are not transmitting money to the state governments. So is there a consequence of this central government delaying?
Yeah, I mean, see, that's what I said. The central government is stretched as of now, and tax collections have fallen, and which is why the RBI has increased the ways and means advances, which the central government now has access to. So I don't know. I mean, so these are administrative questions. I mean, why they are not transferring money? I mean, that only the central government can answer. I mean, I really don't have a straightforward answer for that. So
I have a question, Vivek.
Sure.
Vikram, may I?
Yeah, good.
At a time of crisis, sometimes states and organizations make major changes into how they behave,
right,
which is something what happened in 1991.
Right.
Do you think at this time of an extreme crisis, it will trigger the state to understand the importance of state capacity, of structural changes right into how governance is done, and things like that? Because without all that, these are all going to be incidental, peripheral changes.
100%. I mean, I agree with you. Now, these changes are required. Whether it will happen, I really don't know. Governments really don't change, and they don't change very quickly. So let's say, I mean, 6 months down the line, I might probably be saying a different thing. But as of now, I really don't see any major change happening.
Yeah, Chandra.
And isn't there a serious issue of absence of talent today?
Talent in the government?
In the government.
Of course. But then, I mean, it's very difficult to work with these guys. So.
That's an understatement.
Okay.
Mohit Kabra writes, the negative effects on economy will be felt for years after we conquer COVID-19. How can we get out of the negative feedback loop once there is a cure or vaccine or herd immunity for COVID-19?
I mean, see these. What happens is that economies eventually heal themselves, and I guess I mean, it's a very tricky question to answer. Now, the thing is that the way to sort of get out of this crisis is essentially to ensure that anyone who has a certain entrepreneurial spirit inside him needs to be encouraged to go ahead and become an entrepreneur. Because see, it's very, very straightforward. Big companies do not. I mean, they create jobs, but the maximum number of jobs are created when these smaller companies grow into bigger companies. Now, if you look at data in the Indian case, we have lots and lots of small companies, but these companies are companies which employ less than 50 people. Okay, so companies start small, they continue to remain small. Then we have companies which employ more than 250 people. There is a huge gap in between. Companies which employ from 50 to 250 people, we don't have. Now, these are the companies we actually need. These are the companies which create jobs, and these are the companies, which essentially, when they create jobs, they employ people, and then they get paid, and then people go out and spend money, and this is what is the demographic dividend, the so-called demographic dividend is all about. So you essentially need to encourage people who are entrepreneurial to execute their ideas and let them do it in the way they want to do it, without trying to create a problem for them at every second thing that they want to do. So
there's an interesting question here from Ravi Shankar. What are some permanently economically important changes in work and life at times that you foresee in the post-COVID world?
So so this is a it's a fairly philosophical question, but one thing that I can clearly see is that a lot of companies will now realize that they really don't need a physical space, a big physical space where everyone can come and work. Okay, and in a way it's good, because the way at least in an Indian context, because the way our cities are, our infrastructure really cannot handle people traveling to and fro from work on a daily basis. So, I see more and more people wherever it's possible. I mean, obviously, areas like manufacturing and construction, all this is not possible. But anyone who sort of needs a computer to work does not need to go to office. So, give you a very simple example. Banks have wealth managers, okay, who work out of their premises. Now, a wealth manager need not come to office every day. I mean, he can go meet his clients and then go back home. So this is one big change. So what this will do, obviously, is one is the demand for commercial real estate will go down, which obviously is not good. But what it will also do in a good way is that it should do is that people will have more time on their hands. I mean, in a city like Bombay, if you're walking anywhere in central Mumbai or South Mumbai and staying either in the western or the central suburbs, or even if you're crisscrossing from the western suburbs to the central suburbs, you end up spending 3 hours during the day just traveling, 3 hours out of 16, 17 hours that, of time that you have. So 20% of the time traveling in an environment which is not pretty feasible. I mean, so that is a good thing. So, I mean, if I was in Bangalore and if I were to crack a joke, basically the Silk Board Junction jam would disappear. I mean, in Bangalore, they have these Silk Board jokes. So, we'll no longer have those jokes. So.
I know.
There's a tongue-in-cheek question from Shobit. What about $5 trillion economy by 2024?
Yeah, I mean, what do you want me to say? I mean, it's not happening. Yeah, 5 trillion obviously will.
I think that $5 trillion economy doesn't affect India anymore. Maybe that's what.
No, I mean, it's like, see, it can. I mean, see, the thing is that obviously we'll reach 5 trillion someday, but that's not. It's not going to be 2024 for sure. So.
P.V. Shivaram writes, economics can be looked in isolation as explained very well. Talk appears to have focused on factors within India. What about impact of goings on a global scale on our economy?
Impact of what?
The global scale, what's going on at the global scale, impact of that on our economy.
Okay. I mean, see, when a crisis is global, obviously the impacts are global as well. So, clearly, so one of the things that's happening now and everyone's talking about it, and is the fact that companies will look to get out of China. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, so this is obviously a good opportunity for us. But the question is, will these companies come to India or not? Now, if you look at how the Chinese labor costs have been going up over the years, and in the last few years, a lot of entrepreneurs have moved from China to other parts of the world. I mean, they've moved to Vietnam, they've moved to Bangladesh, but they haven't really come to India. So, I mean, the question is, should they come to India? Yes, but will they come to India? I mean, we can debate on that. So there is an opportunity for us in the crisis. The question is, are we ready to cash in on it? Because this opportunity has been there for the last 4-5 years. In fact, I remember that Arvind Subramaniam, when he was the chief economic advisor, even wrote a detailed note on it. So
there is a very interesting question. I mean, Shankar Narayan asks this question. What is the environmental impact, and does this crisis have good news? I'm sure you're aware that Delhi has now reported whatever the number is from 25, when it was 450 all these days. So maybe it's all interconnected, and maybe
yeah, it is. No. Yeah, of course it is. I mean, as I said, as the economy itself, various factors are interconnected. I mean, then, the economy is also connected to the environment in that way.
Yeah.
So the air we are breathing is clearly much better. But then at what cost, right? I mean, you can't, I mean, as my father used to tell me, you can't just survive on love and fresh air, right? I mean, you need money at the end of the day as well. So yes, so the point again is that, when we go back to a normal sort of scenario, I mean, will the pollution continue to, the fall in pollution continue to remain the same? No. The question is, will it go back to the previous levels, right? Now that again depends on how, how the work environment evolves, whether people continue, I mean, using cars and, stuff like that as much as they used to. And I mean, so that is, I mean, that remains to be seen.
A question from Arjun. Is it a good time for land and labor reforms?
It is always a good time for land and labor reforms.
It's never a bad time to reform.
Yeah. And of course, Khalid writes, don't you think that the government should now realize that they have to get around to real governance instead of playing silly, childish games?
No, but do you think that's happening?
That's right. So there's another question here, I mean, which is, I'm sure we don't have an answer, but I still need to ask this question.
Sure.
Times of economic pressure and where our expenses are coming down, income is coming down. Will corruption come down?
Will corruption come down? Okay. But why should corruption come down? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, probably the payments might come down. Why should corruption as such come down? So, I mean, obviously corruption will also be impacted. When times are good, people who are corrupt also make, I mean, it's very simple, when there are more and more land deals happening. Okay, I'll give you a very simple example. When times are good, there are more real land deals happening. There's more real estate being built. So obviously politicians and bureaucrats make more money. But when times are bad, and when, real estate deals are not happening, and when more homes are not being built, then I mean, there is an equal impact. I mean, if the economy goes down, corruption in, when it comes to the total amount of money being earned also comes down. But I guess as a proportion of GDP, it probably stays the same. So,
yeah, it's the same. So I'll be getting the same favor for a lesser amount of bribe.
But then see, you also have to take into account the fact that the economy is also not growing at the same pace. So as a proportion of the economy, probably corruption continues to remain the same.
I think, Vivek, there are a flurry of questions, but then we cannot solve the world's problems. But we've got a terrific perspective of what you're saying, and the questions were very, very engaging. Ajay, I think I hand it over to you, but I just want to tell people that on Friday evening, we are going to have a long talk by V. Lakshmikant on work and life, working from home, and his own experiences. He's the CEO of Broadridge. That's on Friday evening. Then we have Mrs. Usha Thorat on Sunday morning at the same time to talk to us about the economy in the post-COVID world. Ajay, it's your turn.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. There is a poll you will see on the button. There's a poll button that you will see. We request you to please give us your feedback about this session and future sessions so that we could work on improving what we are doing right now. And Vivek, I cannot thank you enough. This
My
was
pleasure.
an absolutely wonderful session. This was phenomenal. And the kind of response we got from the audience shows how happy they were with having heard
Actually,
you out.
I mean, so Sunday morning wasn't really a bad time.
I know.
People turned up.
This session is going to be put up on YouTube tomorrow. We'll share links with all of you so that you could even watch it again or share it with your friends. Thank you once again. Please use the poll.
Thank you, Vivek, and our apologies to all those who asked questions whose questions couldn't be taken up for paucity of time. Thank you for.
Please fill in the poll once again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek.
Yep.
Oh, even I have an opportunity to do the poll. I mean, all of us, and we are all on.
My guess is we can't, but maybe we can. No, I'm
are
unable to do it.
No, it came and then it vanished. Okay.
Okay, people are filling in. Yeah.
People are filling, but we have cut off the public now. Right now, we can chat.
No, we have not cut off the public. Wait, there are 130 people still online.
Oh, 106.